Welcome to Best Practices in Technology Training. We're going to discuss some simple tips, tools, and strategies that we can easily incorporate into our technology trainings to ensure an effective professional development experience for our audience. We're going to start by talking about the importance of having a strong session framework with a very clear beginning, middle, and end. We're also going to talk about the importance of being very mindful of how we introduce information and the sequence of information. This is particularly important when we are introducing a tool to an audience of educators who don't have prior experience with this tool. We're going to revisit creating meaning from experience and talk a little bit about what that looks like during a technology training. And finally, we're going to close by reminding ourselves to always encourage exploration and creativity. We're going to start by talking about the importance of having a strong and clearly defined session framework. There should be a very clear beginning, middle, and end. This is not just best practice for technology training, but it is especially best practice for technology training, and it's often forgotten during technology training. So we want to make sure that we are always remembering to do this. There are a few things that we need to do at the beginning of a technology training, and the first is always make sure that the objectives are very clear to the learners and they understand very clearly what it is that they're going to learn, how they're going to learn, and why they're going to learn something. Again, this is best practice in adult learning that we've already discussed, and addressing the adult learners' need to know. There's an example in front of you in the slide that you can read independently on your own, but it is important to address here, revisit the why behind the session. And when you're thinking about the adult learners need to know, oftentimes as professional development leaders in school systems and universities, our audience has been sent to the training. They don't always have the choice to attend the training. It's not uncommon for teachers, faculty, and staff to have to attend certain trainings. So when we are addressing the why for our audience, especially if this is the case, we don't want to use the mandate from the school as the why. So we don't want to say to our audience, we're going to learn how to use Photoshop to enhance a photo, and this is how we're going to do it, and we're going to do this because your school says you need to know how to do this. That's not going to be very motivating for your audience. When we're addressing the why, when we're thinking about the adult learners need to know, we always want to think about what motivates the adult learner. We always want to make a connection to how the particular tool can enrich their professional practice or their personal lives. So what is it that this tool can do to really enrich their lives, either professionally or personally? And it may not be clear to them when they enter your session, but it should be clear to them when they leave your session. So that's something to think about when we are addressing the adult learners need to know in a technology training where they didn't have the choice to attend. Another effective strategy at the beginning of your technology training, in the beginning framework, is to make sure that the participants are very aware of how the session is going to flow, that they understand what the agenda is. And again, if they have an opportunity to give some input here, it's a good way to let them feel a little bit self-directed if that's possible. So you want to let them know what the agenda is going to be and what they're going to be doing in what order, how long the session is going to be, how long each activity is going to be, when the breaks are going to be. And another effective strategy is, rather than to just let them know, to bullet out what it is that you're going to learn. So rather than saying we're going to start by learning the product's capabilities and then we're going to go over the interface and then I'm going to show you some key functionalities, it's effective to just turn your agenda into a series of questions. So your agenda should go more or less line up with your objectives. So you want to turn those into questions and say, what can I do with Photoshop? What does Photoshop look like? How can I begin to use it? These are some examples on the slide in front of you. This helps to open up the conversation a little bit and make the educators feel like they are part of the learning with you. It helps to weave in a little bit of inquiry into your session and makes them feel that the learning is a little bit more discovery-oriented. These questions also serve as organizing principles. So as you introduce new knowledge and skills, if you keep these questions posted You can let them guide you throughout the session. And as you introduce new knowledge and tools to your participants, they'll be able to refer to these questions and place all that new knowledge within a larger context. And this will help them to make sense of everything that it is that you're trying to show them, and it will help them to retain the knowledge as well. So for the beginning of the framework, we've talked about the need to always address the learner's need to know, and we reflected on the importance of being very clear with the why. And we also discussed the importance of making sure that the agenda is very clear and transparent, and driving the session with some guiding questions if you're able to do that. Another best practice for the beginning of your session framework is to give participants a preview of the functionalities that are coming up. And if they're not comfortable with technology or used to technology, they may not know what the tools are, the functionalities are, and that's okay, but giving them a preview will help them feel a little bit more self-directed, a little bit more relaxed, and a little bit more open to what it is that's coming at them if they can clearly see what's coming at them. So at the beginning of their session framework, always address the adult learners' need to know. Think about the why when you're addressing the why. Make the agenda very clear. Think about some guiding questions that you can implement, and always let them know what's coming ahead. And the functionalities that you're going to be introducing. In the middle of your session, you should revisit the session questions throughout, revisit the objectives, make transitions between one skill clear to participants, and as you transition and say, we've done this, now we're going to move on to the next activity, let them know as well the need to know behind the activity. So we're going to do this activity. This is how we're going to do this activity, and this is why we're going to do this activity. And then always make sure your participants are aware of where you are during the session, where they are along the learning journey. Act a little bit as a tour guide for them along the journey so that they feel oriented and comfortable. And this way they'll be a little bit more open to the learning. At the end of the session, we want to take time to go back and review, summarize the objectives, revisit the session questions that you formed, allowing them to answer them if they are able to. Provide them with a summary of the functionalities. Review all of the key takeaways. Let them leave with a solid understanding of, or a solid summary and wrap up of the entire session. If you do implement a KWL chart, it's a great time at the end to revisit that KWL chart, going over what they knew when they came in, what they wanted to learn, what they did in fact learn, review key takeaways, and address any questions that they have. Oftentimes in a technology training, the session opening and closing are often cut very short, and I think this happens because facilitators feel so pressed for time with so many functionalities to introduce, so many things to go over. But you need to take the time, or it's most effective to take the time at the beginning for a strong opening, at the end for strong closing. Make sure that you are keeping them oriented throughout the session as well. We've talked about the importance of having a strong session framework. We're now going to talk about the importance of being very mindful of how we are sequencing the information as we introduce a product to an audience. This is particularly true when you're introducing a new tool to an audience with no prior experience or little prior experience. We always want to start by demonstrating the product's real-world applications. Show them what this product is capable of doing in a professional context. Let them see a little bit all of the potential with the product. Once they have an understanding of the largest applications, you can take it down a level and show them some sample student work, some model student work. Show them a particular teacher's classroom, their work, how they are using this tool to inspire students to be creative and express their ideas in creative ways. Once they have an understanding of the real-world application, they've seen some sample student work, you can take it down a notch and then show them the overall user interface. Oftentimes, facilitators just dive right in and start to model functionalities. You do want to take some time to show them the user interface, the overall user interface first. Let them see what's on the left toolbar, the right toolbar, the top toolbar. Let them play around with the interface a little bit at first independently. This doesn't have to take a long time, obviously. but just give them a couple minutes to become oriented to the interface overall, point out any key areas. And once they have comfort with the interface, you can go ahead and drill down and point out any specific functionalities and model those functionalities for your participants. So we talked about the importance of having a strong session framework and being very mindful of how we are introducing a new tool to our audience, starting always with the big picture first. We're going to transition and talk about creating meaning from experience and talk about what that looks like during a technology training. So we have some bulleted items in front of us on the slide. Those in gray are the things that we ideally don't want to do, and those in blue are more effective technology training best practices that we can start to apply to our practice if we're not already doing so. So ideally, we don't want to have a direct instruction driven session, So we don't want the entire session to be direct instruction driven. When I say direct instruction driven, I mean the facilitator is directly instructing participants by talking, modeling, showing, and participants are passively receiving this information by following along or listening and watching the facilitator. It's important to have some direct instruction because we do want to model for our participants. We do want to show them the skills that they need to be successful, the different functionalities of the tool. But this amount of time should be abbreviated. It should be, a good rule of thumb is if you have 1 hour of professional development session, no more than 15 minutes of that hour should be dedicated to direct instruction. So the idea is you want to give your participants some instruction, model key functionalities for them, and then turn it over to them, let them actually engage in the product. And always remember that for every hour, 15 minutes of direct instruction is kind of a good rule of thumb. We want to also avoid the all too common practice of the I show you do model of technology training. So you've probably participated in one of these trainings before where the facilitator models a certain functionality and then they let the entire audience repeat that same functionality and they wait for everybody to complete, and then they go ahead and introduce a new functionality and they ping pong back and forth this way through the entire training. This is not an effective model. Just because the participants are following along after you does not mean that they are learning. It just means that they are following along. It's likely that they're not going to retain those skills, and also they're not going to feel very comfortable with their ability to independently engage with the tool. So we want to avoid the I show you do model of instruction during a technology training. So what do we want to do, ideally, to make sure that our participants are creating meaning from experience during our technology trainings? Well, we do want to model functionalities, but then we want to quickly engage our participants in a larger task. So again, it's good to have some direct instruction, set them up, model for them very clearly so they feel confident, and it's okay to have them follow along and repeat after you or at the same time or a little bit after you, but this should be part of the direct instruction. It should be during that 15 minutes up front. Once you've done the direct instruction and modeled the functionalities, you want to let them engage again and dive into a task. So obviously, if you're only giving them an abbreviated amount of direct instruction, they're not going to be able to successfully, from beginning to end, complete the task on their own. But that's okay. The idea is that they're starting to engage in the product, they're rolling up their sleeves, they're making mistakes, they're coming up with challenges, and then they're getting over those challenges themselves. And for this to happen, we have to allow them to work with one another and ask each other questions. Let them work with each other, problem solve together. They'll be able to get through it. They just need the opportunity to do so. Another effective technique while this is happening, while they're creating meaning from experience, is to partner beginner level users with someone a little bit more skilled so they can coach each other, and circulate the room and guide participants as needed. And let them know it's okay if everybody's not on the same page or doing the same thing at the same time. Everybody's going to have a different approach and they're going to make mistakes, and all of that is okay. The most important thing is that they're engaging in the product and they're starting to have some success with it on their own. So we've talked about the importance of having a strong session framework, of being mindful of how we are introducing a product, sequencing information from the biggest picture first, especially when it's an audience of educators with no prior experience with the tool. And we've talked about creating meaning from experience during a technology training and what that looks like. So we're going to close by reminding ourselves to always encourage exploration and creativity, encourage educators to explore, let them know that there are no mistakes, especially this is important if they're a little bit intimidated by technology. Encourage them to be creative and add their own spin, and then encourage discussions and sharing of ideas, strategies, tools, and tips. So we've reviewed some best practices in technology training. These, of course, are not the only best practices in technology training. These are just a few key areas we can start to think about as we design our professional development sessions and deliver sessions as well. We'd love to hear your own best practices, see what you have to share with your fellow course members in the discussion thread and on Twitter as well. Let us know, too, which of these best practices you think might be the most effective, which of these are you already implementing, which would you like to implement. Perhaps you think some of these are not very effective or would not work for your audience. Let us know that too, and let us know why. We'd always love to hear what you have to say, and we'll be connecting again soon in the course.